Hello and welcome back. Today I'm going to take a really close look at this very exciting new workflow that I've been able to develop where I can use a key command to basically get around my big template. I call it Never Scroll Again. And I can, with key commands, jump to any track or grouping of tracks that I want. It looks like this. F1 shows me all my strings. Option F1 can show me only my string shorts. Command F1 only my string longs. F2 will show me brass. If I want to further consolidate that view, I can hit F18 to show me only brass and tracks with only notes and sound bites. I can stay in that view and jump back to my strings, and now I only see strings with only string tracks with sound bites and notes. I can hit F17 to go back to seeing all my string tracks, or I can hit F16 to go back to viewing all tracks. One thing I actually didn't show in the video yesterday too that's really powerful and useful is I have two master groupings at the top level for page up for me will show me all of my synth master tracks. These are just my group tracks, my bus stems, so I can jump to those. And then these really powerful tracks, groupings at the very top level that are all my pitched tracks, which is F15. So whether it's a synth or guitar or French horns or strings, doesn't matter. It will show me all my tracks that have pitch to them. And then if I hold Option F15, it will also change to showing me all my tracks that have no pitch to them, which is very useful for anyone, that's ever... Let's say you're looking at all your tracks and you highlight them all and you move the Midi, and then you realize, oh no, the Midi that used to be in your bass drum is now triggering a mark tree because it was on a PERC track that had multiple samples, and you didn't actually want to move that Midi, you just wanted to move the Midi of everything that was tonal. So in creating these filters and these groups, I now have a really powerful way to just say, hey, show me all my tracks that only have pitch, or show me all my tracks that only don't have pitch. And so we're going to take a really close look at how we set that up. So that, mind you, all of the key commands that I'm using are my own. I hope that when we get into the nitty-gritty of the setup, you'll take what you want and make it your own. If you want to set it up yourself with your own different commands, or put it on your own iPad, kind of set up those kinds of things, I really encourage that. And I'm excited to actually, please give me your feedback. I'm excited to hear about what people end up doing with this. But without further ado, I'm going to close this setup and this Keyboard Maestro setup, and we're going to start fresh so that we can see how we build it from the ground up. All right, so as you can see, we now have this pretty basic digital performer file open, and we're just going to use it to showcase how to set up our tagging codes to get this really exciting new system to work. So the very first thing I'm going to do is open in Keyboard Maestro. I'm going to create a new macro group over here. And we're going to call it Digital Performer Tutorial, just for now. And notice that it defaults to available in all applications. I'm going to change that to available in these applications. I'm going to select Digital Performer. And this way, when we trigger a macro, it doesn't do something crazy in some other application. It will only affect Digital Performer. So let's jump back to Digital Performer. And as you can see, none of the track titles yet have any codes in them. And this is where we should start to think about what are the codes we want to use, and why is each character important? What can each character do for us? And really that starts with figuring out for ourselves, what are the groups that we want to create? So for me, at the top level, I wanted to create a group that was all my pitched tracks and all my non-pitched tracks. So that I could quickly especially open all my pitch tracks without worrying about seeing MIDI from things like snare drums or bass drums that I never wanted to move whilst I was modulating all my pitch tracks. And then there being all sorts of occasions where I want to be able to quickly say, hey, show me only tracks that are non-pitched. when I want to work with all my percussion tracks or say horror effects or things like that. So that's at the top level. Beneath that, I know I want to be able to separate by sections. So I want to be able to see all my string tracks, all my brass tracks, all my percussion tracks, all my synth pads or my synth arpeggios, things like that. So that's at the next level. And at the bottom level, I didn't end up doing this for everything, and I may go back and change that later. But for now, I love the idea of being able to view only my string short tracks, which could be these, only my staccato tracks, and only my string long tracks. So my legatos, my harmonics, tremolos, things like that, all in one, shorts all in another. Now, one quick thing I'll mention is that one of the great new features about Digital Performer 11 is its articulation mapping. I know a lot of people are really excited about that. I'm excited to take a deeper look at it, but I've never used it up to this point, and for now, I love the power that this gives me. This system gives me to sort of quickly get through my own articulations without having to set up articulation mapping just yet. So we've identified these 3 levels, and that's going to help inform what our codes should be. So at the top level, we have tonal versus non-tonal. So I'm going to say that all of my tonal tracks are going to start with the code T0. Now, why T0 and not just the letter T? Well, that's because if I ever have a non-tonal track with a T in it, it would trigger that, which I don't want, such as Mark Tree. So by making it T0, we'll start with the bass track there as T0 for now, and the tuba track here is T0, and xylophone last but not least. So by making it T0, we make sure that we only see tracks that are tagged T0 that are pitched. And we don't accidentally get this Mark Tree track in there, which we don't want. Now, anything non-pitched, I'm going to start for the same reason with X0. Ooh. And now between T0 and X0, we have a great way to sort of delineate whether or not we get to see, when we type up in our search filter T0, we get to see pitch tracks or non-pitch tracks. So at the next level, we said we wanted to separate between families. Well, this is where the third character can come in. So for strings, I'm going to make the family code S. And so anything that's strings will be T0S. I'm going to make brass T0B. And I'll make PERC X0P. And I'll make this one T0P, because it's PERC, but it's tonal. And now what's really cool is we've been able to separate out to the third degree at this next level the different families. But especially notice here how we've got X0P and T0P. And what's really great about this is because of the T0 and the X0 delineation, we can separate when PERC is pitched versus non-pitched. But because they share the 0P, we can also view all PERC together by just making our filter 0P. So now we're seeing pitched and non-pitched all together in PERC. So lastly, that fourth moniker, that fourth character, can help us separate between staccato notes and longer notes. So if I make bass staccato T0S2, but I make bass legato T0S1, we now have a way to filter out short versus long by simply typing 0S1 or 0S2. So now that we've got the code set up, I'm going to take a moment. I'll come back after I copy the codes to the rest of the tracks so everything is set up. All right, so I've gone ahead and I've copied these codes to all these tracks. And what's great is now we have a system. So if we type in T0 across all the families, we'll see everything that is pitched. Or if we type in X0, we'll see everything that's non-pitched. If we type in T0S, we see all my strings, or T0B, we see all my brass, or T0P, we see all my pitched percussion. If we type in simply 0P, we actually see all the percussion. If we type in T0S1, we see only long string tracks. But if we change that to a 2, we see short string tracks. So that's the coding system, and we've got it working for us. Now we need to get Keyboard Maestro to do the heavy lifting for us, so we don't even have to worry about this ever. So how do we do that? Well, first let's create the top level. So we're going to do all pitched. So we can keep this in order, I'm going to do O1, all pitched. And what do we want the trigger to be? Well, in my case, I'm just going to do something quick right out of my keyboard access. I'm going to do page up. And we're going to do type a keystroke. We want Command F. Why Command F? Because if you recall, that's what Digital Performer believes is the key command for entering the search field. So if I'm in Digital Performer and I hit Command F, notice that the cursor starts blinking because it's ready for me to type in the search field. Notice too now, if I hit page up, same thing happens because Digital Performer is listening to Keyboard Maestro, and page up will send a Command F command. So now what do we want to do? Well, we're doing all pitched, which we decided is a T0 filter. So we're going to use this very, very useful Keyboard Maestro step, which is called insert text by pasting. We're going to put in T0. Now it's really important that you use pasting and not typing. And the reason is because pasting will actually paste whatever is here into this in one fell swoop. If you do it as typing, then it's going to type it out letter by letter, which we don't want because Digital Performer then slows down as it waits for each next letter to show up in here. So by pasting, we can get Digital Performer to react instantaneously as the full code is pasted into the field. Lastly, we're going to add a return command so that it knows it's done typing and the field is finished. So what does that look like? If we hit page up, watch what happens. So it enters the field, it pastes in T0 and hits enter, and I'm ready to go and do whatever I want. Now what's really cool is when I'm ready and I've got this set up, all I have to do is duplicate the macro, change the title, and we're going to call it all unpitched. And I'm going to make this page down. And all we're going to do here is simply change the text that gets pasted from T0 to X0. And now, when we hit page down, we get Keyboard Maestro to paste in X0 to the search field, and we get a result. Now, before we go and create a macro for each of the sections, for each of the codes in Keyboard Maestro, we actually have to take a moment to take a look at how the tagging behaves in the Midi editor, because what we want to also achieve is the ability to use our key commands to get around the Midi editor as well and be able to recall our groupings and our tracks without ever having to leave the Midi editor and click on a region here and there. The end goal, right, of course, is just open Midi editor, use key commands to get around Midi editor until you're done. And Midi editor with view filter behaves a little bit differently than tracks overview does. But not to worry, Keyboard Maestro gives us all the power we need to get around this discrepancy. So first, to show off why this is important to take a moment and look at this, I'm going to create some Midi in violin 1, long. I'm going to copy it in violin 2, maybe just put it here. Then, in a non-pitch track, let's add something to bass drum, just a little note here. Add a couple bass drum notes. So this is what everything looks like when we open it up together. Now, here's where things get a little more complicated. If I am in Midi Editor and I engage one of my layouts, that's the two I've created, right, or pitched and unpitched. So if I engage pitched, it's going to put the filter there properly, and I'm going to see only my pitched tracks, which are these violin tracks. But watch what happens if I close Midi Editor, and then I highlight my bass drum from here and open it. I don't actually see anything because the view filter here has kept me on my pitched tracks. It didn't clear the view filter. So we need to do a couple of things. We need to have a way to tell DP to show all tracks or clear the view filter when I open the Midi Editor. And to do that, we can do a couple things. First, I'm going to basically create my own version of the Open Midi Editor command, which is Shift+G. Now, Shift+G just is boring old Shift+G. But when we use Keyboard Maestro, we can do some really cool things with Shift+G. So first, I'm going to create a new macro. I'm going to call it Open Midi Editor. Trigger is going to be Shift+G, because that's what it's always been. And the very first thing it's going to do, surprise, surprise, is hit Shift+G. Now, it's also important to note that anytime you create a macro in Keyboard Maestro, it's going to supersede and take over whatever the macro would have been in Digital Performer. So that's why when we hit Shift+G, the very first thing we're going to do is have it tell Digital Performer, hit Shift+G, just like you've always done. But we're not going to stop there. So the first thing we're going to do is do a very cool little feature that I found years ago, which is, did you ever notice how in Digital Performer, when you open a track, it doesn't record enable it? Now, most other sequencers do behave that way. Logic, Cubase, when you open a track in Piano Roll, that's the track that's record enabled. So you open it, you want to be able to hit your piano, and you want to be on that track playing. Digital Performer doesn't do that by default, but because of Keyboard Maestro, we can do that. And thanks to, if you're in Digital Performer 10, you can still do what I'm about to do, although it's more complicated. You can use a click action in Keyboard Maestro. So click, move mouse and click. And what you can do, it's pretty cool, is you can do move mouse and click at top left corner screen. Make sure you have it set to restore mouse location. Type get. It gives you a counter, and make sure you position the cursor right there. And what it does is it automatically captures the location that you need to click. This is pretty cool because watch what happens. Now, anytime I hit Shift-G, it's going to hit Shift-G and click there and restore my mouse location. And the end result is that that track is now record enabled. So that's if you're in DP10. If you're in DP11, I'm very excited to say that they added a track record enable, excuse me, it's actually not that, it's record enable tracks key command, which I've set to control+option+command+R. This does exactly the same thing, but because it's not a click, it's even faster and it's even more reliable. So anytime you highlight any track, for me, control+option+command+R, you can see automatically gets record enabled. So in this case, if I'm using Digital Performer 11, I don't even have to do it with clicks. I can just do it with Open Shift-G, hit Command Control+R, and now watch what happens. I hit Shift-G, that track becomes record enabled. So this right away is super useful, huge time saver, and gets Digital Performer to behave more like Cubase and Logic in this very important respect. Now, we're going to add some more things to Shift-G. So when I open Shift-G, I want to make sure that it clears my filter. So to do that, I'm also going to add a Option-Shift-F command. And now what this is going to do is it's going to automatically clear the filter if anything was left over from before. And that's important because if I'm looking at all my pitch tracks, let's say I'm looking at all my pitch tracks, and then I have something in the filter. Now, when I open this one, which wasn't in that filter, it's going to clear it, and I'm actually going to get to see this. So this helps a lot with Shift+G. But we're not quite done yet, because the other thing you might have noticed is if I'm looking at say just this violin track here, and I want to look at all my pitch tracks. If I input the filter to do that, nothing happens. It comes in here and I see it, but I don't actually get my other pitch tracks because I should be seeing violin 1 and 2. But I'm only seeing, I'm going to try to hit it again. It gets put down, but I don't see anything. And the reason is because unlike in Tracks Overview, in Midi Editor, the filters will adjust what is here, but it won't actually select it. The good news is all we need is F17 to select it. So what we need to do is have a way to tell Digital Performer when you open when you're looking at tracks in Midi Editor and you engage one of your filter macros, you also need to hit Show All, which is F17, in order to actually see everything. So again, we're gonna do the filter command and then F17 to actually go back to seeing what was in that filter command. Now, this is where it gets a little bit complicated and where we're really thankful for the power of Keyboard Maestro, because whereas in Midi Editor, we want to hit the F17 command after we hit the filter, in Tracks Overview, we actually don't. That would be an unnecessary step that would slow things down and get even more complicated. So what we need is a way to tell Digital Performer if the main tracks windows in front do this, but if Midi Editor is the window I'm looking at, do something else. And the way we do that is with this really awesome and useful step in Keyboard Maestro called if then else. So we're going to add that to our chain here. And we're going to change this to front window condition. And we're going to change this to title contains Midi Editor. And this is really cool because watch. So right now, when I'm looking at the tracks overview, it's just the tracks overview. And notice how this says false. But if I open this track in Midi Editor, this changed to true. It's a way for Keyboard Maestro to tell what window is in front. And two, what's great about DP is that Midi Editor is always going to be in this title, no matter what the file title is or the chunk title, doesn't matter, it will always contain the word Midi Editor. So now I have a way to create a branch to do two different things depending on if Midi Editor is what I'm looking at or not. So if it isn't what I'm looking at, I'm going to take the actions I used to have and I'm going to put them down here. And that way, I'm going to get exactly what I originally had when I'm in this window. So I'll be able to do page up, page down. I'll be able to do all tracks. Let's close this. We can look at all tracks again. And it'll behave exactly like it did before. So I'll add an if then else to this again. We'll make this front window condition. Nope, title contains. We'll drag these actions in here. Now watch what happens. If I'm in Midi Editor, and this is true, and I hit my commands, nothing happens. And that's because it doesn't have any actions to execute yet. And the way we do this, we could hold Option, drag in here to duplicate it. And then all we need to do to solve our problem is at the end of the chain, for when it's true, for when it's in the Midi Editor, we simply add a show all. So F17. We're going to do the same thing back in here. Duplicate into here. Show all at the end of the chain for when it is true. And now we can successfully navigate between the two, between show pitched and unpitched. Because now what it's going to do is it's going to not only put in the filter, it's going to make sure it selects everything with the F17 show all. And the best part is it's not going to do that unless Midi editor is in the front for when it's true. So here, it won't actually do that because it doesn't need to. Here, it'll just behave as normal without the F17 command. And in here, it'll give us that extra F17 command. I can't tell you how many times the if-then box has been useful to deal with issues like this. Like, it's so powerful. Like, if you have a command that you want to use in tracks to do one thing in tracks overview, or maybe you want it to do only a separate thing in the mixer window, you could change this to title contains mixing board, and now it'll only do a different thing when the mixing board is in the front of the window. So really, really powerful step in Keyboard Maestro. So now that we've set that up, we can bring everything home by adding this to the rest of the tags. So I'm going to create another. I'm going to duplicate this. Let's call it 3. I'm going to say strings all. Let's make that F1. And we're going to make the tag codes for strings all, if you remember, are OS. So now if we hit F1, we see only our string tracks. What's pretty cool too is if we open this, and that's true, we hit F1, we also see only our string tracks. So the last bit of this is how do we get back to viewing everything? So F1, right, will give me all my violin tracks, all my string tracks. And what's really cool, right, is that this can be used in tandem with the show and hide other track features. So let's say, you've got tons of tracks here, but you really just want to see all your strings tracks that only contain sound bites or notes. Well, we've got that command for F18, which will just not show us anything else. F17 will do a show all. But notice how when you do show all in Digital Performer with something in the search field, it doesn't clear the search field. It simply does a show all based on what was already in the search field. That's actually really useful because it means I can just quickly sort of jump back and forth between seeing only sound bites and notes, and then if I want to go and work with a track that's still just in strings that maybe doesn't have anything on it yet, I can just quickly see that as well. But we need a way to go back to viewing all. It's really quite simple, actually. We just need a show all command that then also clears the search field. So what we're going to do is we're going to create another macro. Just create a new one. I'm going to say show all true all. I'm going to make the trigger F16. And what it's going to do is type F17. And then it's going to clear the search field, which if you remember is Option Shift F. So now what I can do is I can be looking at strings. I can quickly show only tracks, sound bites, notes, show all with the filter on, and then F16 will do the same command and then clear the search field to show me everything again. So really, really powerful way to get around. F2 can show me my brass. F18 again shows me nothing because there's no tracks yet there. If I add something, if I add a soundbite or a note, F18 will just show that. F17 will bring me back to showing with that filter on. F16 will bring me back to showing everything. And again, this works in Midi editor now too. So if I open Midi editor and I hit Shift+G, I can go look at my strings tracks. I can use Option F1 to look at only the shorts, Command F1 to look at only the longs. And if I want to go back to viewing everything, I can hit F16. Or, lastly, if I'm in this window and I think, I want to transpose everything up a whole step. Well, I don't want to do it with my non-pitch tracks, and which ones are those, and I don't want to think about it. All I have to do is hit Page Up, and now I know that I'm seeing only all the MIDI that has a pitch, and none of the MIDI that doesn't have a pitch. So I can just quickly grab everything and move it up, and I'm good. And then if I go back to show all, I can see these tracks didn't move. Or if I know I need to look at only tracks that have no pitch at all, I can hit no pitch, and I see that in this window. And I can do whatever I want with the PERC. And I don't even need to leave this window and figure out, what's here and whatnot. So it's really powerful. I hope this is how the tagging system works and the Keyboard Maestro works. I hope this has been really helpful. Please feel free to get in touch with me through the Facebook forum. I really look forward to hearing your comments, and if there's requests for future videos, I'd love to hear that. I'll be doing some more videos as I find the time on a couple other nifty little things I've figured out over the years. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and thank you so much for listening.